marshaled, outnumbering Hannibal's forces by something like 2-1.
The Battle of Cannae is Hannibal's greatest challenge. He can see the Roman army is bigger than his. They've got twice as many heavy infantrymen as he's got. Hannibal's got to find a way of defusing that power somehow, and of using the Romans' strength and their power against them.
And to ensure that there could be no ambush this time, at Cannae the Romans met Hannibal on an open plain.
You have to imagine about 150,000 men stretched out in the field over there. They're stretching from the river for about 4 kilometers out in that direction. Every single one of them's terrified. Their hearts are beating, butterflies in their stomachs. Some of them feel physically sick. They're wondering who's going to be alive at the end of the day.
The Roman army masses in a large formation. Their plan is simply to use their massive numerical advantage to steamroller through Hannibal's army. Hannibal stretches his men into a single thin line to face the Roman onslaught.
Then, just to show the Romans he's not frightened of them, he actually advances the center of that line to put his men, when they start the battle, nearer to the Romans than they needed to be.
Hidden behind this line, on either side, are his best heavy infantry, the Libyans.
The most disciplined troops in Hannibal's army are the Libyan infantrymen raised from North Africa. These are very well trained and they're very heavily equipped, and these people can go head to head against Roman legionaries and stand a good chance of winning.
Hannibal then sends his cavalry on each flank to fight their opposite numbers on the Roman side.
All he emphasizes to his cavalry officers is that they've got to win quickly. Time is the critical thing at the Battle of Cannae. Hannibal's plan relies upon each thing happening in sequence, and if one fails, the whole thing would unravel.
The Roman juggernaut then meets the thin line of Hannibal's troops, and after fierce fighting, Hannibal's line begins to give in the center.
The Romans are successful at first. They push back the Celtic and Spanish infantry, forcing the crescent to turn inside out. Now they think they're winning. That's exactly what Hannibal wants them to think.
At this stage, the Roman armies send more and more men into the center to keep pressing their advantage. As the fighting line is pushed back, the Romans find themselves with Hannibal's Libyans on either flank. Now Hannibal gets these, his best infantry, to wheel round and attack the Roman army from both sides. The Roman army has been drawn into a trap. Finally, Hannibal's cavalry, having defeated the Romans, regroup and attack from behind. The Roman army has been completely surrounded.
Tactically, the Roman army hasn't got a hope. Maybe some 50,000 men are surrounded in one dense mass. They can't fight effectively, they're trapped. But then Hannibal's army has to kill them, and that's when the grim part of Cannae begins.
What followed was a massacre. Rome's army was to all intents and purposes annihilated. But what makes this particularly terrifying is this isn't mechanized fighting. This is all done hand to hand.
Most close combat at Cannae is fought using this kind of weapon, a short sword, which can be used not just for slashing at an enemy, but also for stabbing. You can hunch in against an enemy and stab at them with the sword. You're not restricted by having men close to you. This is a falcata. It's a slashing sword. It's a natural chopping action for the sword, but also if you hack at an enemy, and even as you draw it away, you're going to cut even deeper as you do so. You're slicing great chunks of flesh away with it. It won't kill people, but it will immobilize them and leave them slowly and painfully bleeding to death on the field. This is the pilum. It's the basic throwing weapon of the Roman infantry. It's got a heavy head which punches through the shield, and then the narrow shaft is carried by the weight behind it. Even if the shield's held this far away from the body, it's capable of going through the shield and carrying on to actually kill the man behind. It can actually transfix the shield onto his body. So the shield itself is useless as a defense against it. These people aren't being killed with neat little bullet holes, even relatively neat kind of stab wounds from spears. They're being hacked down by thick, broad-bladed swords. People are even having limbs removed. You've got innumerable mutilated corpses lying on the battlefield, and all of them just pouring their blood out onto the ground. Even if the average person or horse lost, 2 pints of blood on that ground, that's 100,000 pints of blood spilt onto the soil of Cannae.
Cannae remains one of the bloodiest battles ever fought. It's estimated that Rome lost more than 50,000 men, the largest loss of life in any single day, before or since.
Even today, military historians and a lot of professional soldiers are still fascinated, almost obsessed by the Battle of Cannae. And it's held up as the example of the most complete tactical victory. They'll talk in terms of perfect double envelopment and all this sort of thing.
So complete was this victory that Hannibal's tactics are still taught in military academies, more than 2,000 years later. And in the First Gulf War in 1991, Hannibal's tactics at Cannae were employed by the UN commander, General Storman Norman Schwarzkopf.
I learned many things from the study of the Battle of Cannae that I applied to Desert Storm.
So you can see basically what our problem was at that time. We were outnumbered as a minimum 3-2 as far as troops were concerned. We were outnumbered as far as tanks were concerned, and we had to come up with some way to make up the difference.
We used a little misdirection, and we allowed the Iraqis to think that we were going to do something that we weren't going to do, and they bought it.
Like Hannibal, Schwarzkopf had his enemy focus its attention in one place while he enveloped and surrounded them.
We really used economy of force, just as Hannibal did. We used economy of force to fix the enemy, fix the strength of the enemy, keep them focused in one area, while we went ahead and used maneuver to get around behind them and on their flanks.
At the same time, we launched the 1st Armored Division, the 3rd Armored Division, and because of our deception plan and the way it worked, we didn't even have to worry about a barrier. We just went right around the enemy and were behind him in no time at all. The 7th Corps came in and attacked in this direction. The 24th Infantry Division made an unbelievable move all the way across into the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. The only avenue of egress left because we continued to make sure that the bridges stayed down. So there was no way out.
Among military historians, Cannae has become a byword for an overwhelming victory, a tactically perfect battle. Despite it, however, Hannibal's next move was even more surprising. He handed Rome the key to his own downfall. After the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal had accomplished more than anyone could have imagined. He'd beaten Rome's armies on the battlefield a total of 3 times. And these battles weren't just defeats, they were catastrophes of historical proportions, made all the worse for the Romans because they were fought on their home ground.
In the 2 years since Hannibal's arrived in Italy, he's killed something like 100,000 Romans and their allies. He's killed a third of Rome's Senate. Absolutely every family is in mourning for some relation or other, or used to sit next to someone who is now not there anymore.
By the standards of the day, Hannibal had clearly won not just the battles, but the war itself.
Hannibal has won the war as he understands it, and he clearly expects the Romans to admit defeat, to roll over, say, right, fair enough, you've beaten us, and begin peace negotiations, and accept whatever terms he, the victor, chooses to impose on them.
The problem was that the Romans wouldn't accept defeat.
The Romans are not giving in, they keep on going. And this is a basic truth throughout all periods of history. You only really win a war when your enemy concedes defeat.
By refusing to surrender, Rome had in essence thrown away the old rule book.